"Get out of that office right now, or I'll bury you alive." Those were the very first words Victoria Karen Ashford hurled at me as she stormed into my Lake Ranch office like a hurricane in heels, waving a stack of absurdly thick papers that she claimed were regulatory violations. She was yelling something about a community vision violation and insisted I evacuate the property immediately. I stayed calm and simply refused, which pushed her right over the edge. She snatched out her phone, dialed 911, and started shrieking about a dangerous intruder on her property. But here's where things took a jaw-dropping turn. What seemed like a typical neighborly dispute was about to unravel into a full-blown war of egos, control, and secrets, and Victoria, she had just made a fatal mistake. Because the dispatcher answering her emergency call had been under my direct command for 3 solid years. What happened next flipped the entire story upside down. My name's Ethan Riverside, I'm 35, and a former staff sergeant in the Marines who retired early after catching a piece of shrapnel in my left shoulder during deployment. Not long ago, I inherited Willowbrook Ranch from my grandfather, 45. Stunning acres nestled beside Oregon's Crystal Lake, complete with a humble wooden office where I'd been living temporarily. "This land will teach you patience and courage," Grandpa always said. I thought I was finally stepping into a life of peace and solitude until I crossed paths with Victoria Karen Ashford, the 48-year-old president of the Lakeside Premium Estates, HOA. She had a platinum bob, a stare like ice, and enough arrogance to make royalty seem modest. The day it all went haywire started quietly. I was inside, tinkering with one of Grandpa's dusty old ham radios when the door suddenly burst open. Without a single knock, Victoria swept in like a storm cloud, dressed in a crisp white Armani suit, red-soled Louis Vuitton heels clicking ominously across the floor, radiating disdain with every step. Her makeup was airbrushed to perfection, her hair flawlessly styled, and her glare sharp enough to chill the lake outside. Clutching a thick manila folder and an iPad, she marched up to my grandfather's antique desk and slammed them down so hard my coffee mug rattled. "Mr. Riverside," she announced coldly, her voice sharp as shattered glass. "I am Victoria Ashford, president of the Lakeside Premium Estates Homeowners Association." Finished her icy introduction with a tone that suggested she thought she was delivering a royal decree. "We have a serious problem," she said, glaring at me like I'd spray-painted graffiti across the Mona Lisa. "This rustic eyesore you call an office is in direct violation of our premium community aesthetic standards. It's degrading property values for every homeowner, and frankly, it's an embarrassment to our entire community vision." I calmly took a sip of my coffee and watched her, noting how her indignation felt more like a performance than genuine concern, as if she were auditioning for a role in a drama only she could see. "Ma'am," I said, holding my ground, "this building's been here since 1952, and this land has been in my family for over 70 years. Your HOA has no authority over private land that was never part of your development." She didn't flinch. Her flawlessly manicured fingers tapped rapidly on her iPad before she spun it around to show me what looked like a petition and an official-looking document. "Authority," she declared triumphantly. "I have 47 signatures from concerned residents and a zoning violation report filed just yesterday." But what caught my eye wasn't the petition. It was the timestamp on that zoning complaint. It had been filed exactly 1 day after I moved back to the ranch, and the timing reeked of petty retaliation rather than genuine community concern. I tilted my head slightly and gave her a knowing look. "That's interesting," I said slowly, "especially since I only arrived here 3 days ago. Was this problem bothering everyone when the office sat empty, or did it only become a crisis the second someone moved in?" For a brief moment, the question landed. Her eyes flickered, and a subtle flush crept beneath her thick foundation, betraying just a flicker of vulnerability. But she straightened quickly, regaining that frosty posture. "The timing is irrelevant," she snapped. "What matters is that you need to vacate this property within 48 hours or will be forced to take legal action." "I'm trying to be reasonable here, Mr. Riverside, but my patience has limits." She began pacing the small wooden office like a restless predator, her designer heels clicking with each step, echoing through the room like a countdown to something inevitable. As she moved, I could feel the weight of my grandfather's words settling deep into my bones. "Son, this land isn't just an inheritance, it's a responsibility. Protecting it is like defending the family's honor." That sense of duty pressed against my chest like armor, and though I remained outwardly calm, the fire inside me burned steady and strong. "Miss Ashford," I said evenly, "I understand your concern for your community, but this is private land, owned and cared for by my family for over 70 years. I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment her polished facade shattered. Her voice pitched up to a near scream as she yanked out her phone with dramatic flair. "Fine," she shrieked. "If you won't listen to reason, we'll see how you handle the authorities." Her fingers moved rapidly, dialing 911 with the kind of speed that suggested she'd done this before. "Yes, hello? I need the police immediately. There's a dangerous intruder in our community, refusing to leave and threatening residents." I nearly laughed at the absurdity being called an intruder on the land I'd grown up visiting every summer, but something about the carefully performed panic in her voice made my gut tighten. Her hysteria didn't seem spontaneous, it felt rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing for this exact moment. As she kept talking, painting me as unstable and potentially violent, another piece of advice from Grandpa echoed in my mind. The loudest one in the room is usually the one most afraid. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the gravel drive and outstepped Officer Maya Delacroix. I recognized her instantly, the confident posture, the sharp eyes that missed nothing, the way she scanned the scene. Before making a single move, the professional alertness never really leaves the Marines, and it certainly hadn't left Officer Maya Delacroix. At 29, originally from Louisiana, she had once served as a corporal under my command during 4 brutal years in Syria, and her every movement still reflected that battlefield poise. The moment she stepped out of the cruiser, Victoria surged toward her like a woman expecting backup in a courtroom drama. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she gushed, her voice thick with entitlement. "This man has been harassing our community and refusing to leave despite multiple requests. I have full documentation of the violations, and I want him removed immediately." She thrust her iPad forward like it was the Constitution itself, her tone confident, almost smug. But the reaction she expected never came. Maya didn't even glance at the screen. Her eyes landed on me, and recognition sparked instantly. Her expression shifting from neutral professionalism to a flicker of surprise mixed with deep respect. "Sergeant Riverside," she said, stepping forward. "Sir, is that you? How's the shoulder healing? Last I heard, you were still dealing with that shrapnel mess." The color drained from Victoria's face so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. Her smugness melted into confusion as she stammered, "You two ... know each other." Her voice had lost all its sharpness and now wavered with uncertainty. Maya nodded, her voice softer now but laced with steel. "Ma'am, Sergeant. Riverside was my commanding officer in Syria. He carried me out of an ambush after I was hit in the leg. Saved my life." Then she turned her full attention back to me with genuine concern. "Sir, what's going on here?" I gave her a calm, direct summary of the events, no emotion. Just the facts. Victoria, clearly unnerved, kept trying to interject, waving her iPad like a warning flag, repeatedly referencing her close ties with the sheriff's department and insisting this was a legal matter. But Maya, ever the Marine, remained focused not on bluster, but on the truth, gathering details with quiet precision and refusing to be swayed by theatrics. Maya remained completely unmoved by Victoria's emotional appeals, calmly reviewing her documents and taking a brief walk around the property before concluding that no actual laws had been broken. There were no violations, no legal grounds, and certainly no reason for an arrest. As the truth settled in, Victoria's carefully curated mask of control began to splinter. Her expression twisted, her voice dropping into something colder, more venomous. "This isn't over, Mr. Riverside," she hissed, her words laced with menace. "You have no idea what kind of power premium community leadership holds in this county. You're going to regret underestimating me." And with that ominous warning, she turned on her heel and vanished down the path. I should have known that wouldn't be the end. The very next morning, I got my first bitter taste of what Victoria's version of war looked like: legal, relentless, and suffocating. My mailbox was overflowing with 4 official-looking envelopes, each more threatening than the last. The first contained a formal complaint from the H.O.A. listing a series of vague code violations, all printed with professional letterhead and written in a maze of legalese that could intimidate even a seasoned attorney. The second was a notice from the county planning department claiming there was an active investigation into unauthorized commercial activity. Ridiculous, considering I hadn't done anything more commercial than fixing Grandpa's radio. Then came the third envelope, which nearly made me spit out my coffee in disbelief. A sudden property tax reassessment that jacked my yearly dues from $800 to a staggering $8,400, with no explanation other than a vague reference to updated zoning. But the final envelope was the kicker: an emergency environmental inspection notice, accusing my land of potential water contamination and scheduling a surprise inspection the following week. I laid the documents out on my kitchen table like a battlefield map, analyzing them for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that would explain this perfectly timed bureaucratic blitz. That's when I found it. Buried in the reassessment papers was a land reclassification form, quietly filed on March 15th, exactly 2 days after Victoria's first dramatic entrance into my office. Even more damning was the property owner's consent signature, which looked suspiciously like the flowing cursive on the HOA documents Victoria had been brandishing just the day before. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just neighborhood politics, it was targeted, calculated sabotage. And if Victoria wanted to play dirty, then it was time for me to do a little reconnaissance of my own. My first stop was the county assessor's office, where I found Gerald Pennington, a weary, soft-spoken man in his early 50s, sitting behind a desk buried in paperwork, sweating bullets despite the AC blasting like it was trying to freeze the place. The second he saw me step through the doorway with documents in hand, a look of dread washed over his face, like he already knew why I was there. I calmly introduced myself and laid the property tax reassessment notice in front of him. "Mr. Pennington," I said, keeping my tone measured, "I'm hoping you can help me understand how my property taxes jumped over 1,000% in just 48 hours. His hands twitched, eyes darting nervously as he began rifling through papers in a frantic, disorganized scramble. After several minutes of incoherent explanations about routine evaluations and standard zoning protocols, Gerald finally cracked. The words spilled out like water from a busted dam. Victoria had been blackmailing him, using compromising photos of an extramarital affair to force his cooperation. She threatened to expose him to both his wife and the county commissioners, unless he signed fraudulent reassessment forms that served her agenda. Apparently, Victoria had turned blackmail into an art form, using Gerald to inflate tax bills and fabricate zoning issues to push landowners into surrendering their property. This wasn't just HOA harassment, it was a calculated campaign of intimidation and corruption. Armed with that knowledge, I headed next to see Rosa Martinez, a longtime neighbor who lived just half a mile down the road in a small, flower-draped cottage that radiated warmth and peace. Rosa, 58 and sharp as a tack, welcomed me onto her porch like family, offering sweet tea and cookies as we settled into a quiet conversation about the neighborhood's recent, chaotic history. "Victoria Ashford is trouble with a capital T," Rosa whispered, leaning in despite the fact we were completely alone. She had the kind of institutional memory you can't find in records 25 years of living through the subtle and not-so-subtle shifts in the area. "In the past 3 years," she continued, 4 families who refused to sell to Ashford Development Corporation suddenly had ... accidents. She rattled them off like a grim checklist. The Hendersons, whose well inexplicably turned toxic right after rejecting Victoria's offer. The Kowalskis, who watched their barn burn to the ground under mysterious circumstances after saying no to a contract. And the elderly Thompsons, who were blindsided by a lawsuit over property boundaries that appeared out of nowhere. Each case bore the same sinister fingerprint: legal pressure, manufactured crises, and a clear motive: push them out, claim the land, and expand her empire by any means necessary. Bankrupted them into selling, Rosa finished grimly, her eyes narrowing with the weight of memory. And don't even get me started on what happened to poor Harrison. That name made me sit up straighter. Harrison Ashford, Victoria's late husband, whose name I'd seen plastered on several old development documents during my property deep dive. What exactly happened to Harrison? I asked, and Rosa's friendly warmth faded into something darker, more troubled. She explained that Harrison had died suddenly of a heart attack about 20 months ago, but the town had been quietly buzzing ever since about how strange the timing had been. Harrison, it turned out, had been a vocal critic of Victoria's aggressive land-grabbing tactics and had strongly favored environmental preservation over commercial expansion. Right after Harrison died, Rosa said, her voice low, Victoria fired the environmental lawyer he'd hired to block her construction projects and rushed through every permit he had been trying to stop. It was like she couldn't wait to erase everything he stood for. Rosa also revealed that Victoria had been under increasing pressure from the board of directors at Ashford Development Corporation ever since her husband's death. Her authority was being questioned, her leadership doubted, and every successful land acquisition had become more than a business. Victory, it was a desperate move to prove she still had control, that she was still the queen of her empire. The picture was becoming disturbingly clear. Victoria wasn't just a petty H.O.A. tyrant. She was a power-hungry operator, clinging to relevance with claws sharpened by desperation and fear. Her tactics, from zoning manipulation to blackmail, property sabotage to legal intimidation, were part of a highly organized campaign, not random incidents. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute. It was a high-stakes territorial war, and anyone who opposed her seemed to suffer very real consequences. As I left Rosa's porch, my head spinning with the weight of what I'd just learned, my phone buzzed in the cup holder beside me. A text message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it." Beneath the message was a photo of my ranch, taken from the tree line across Crystal Lake, my house dead center, clearly zoomed in from a long lens. Someone had eyes on me, and they wanted to make sure I knew it. The photograph had clearly been taken with a long-range telephoto lens from deep within the tree line, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to capture every detail of my home. That level of surveillance suggested something far more advanced and intentional than I'd originally suspected. Victoria's reach wasn't just manipulative, it was methodical, invasive, and dangerous. That night, as I sat in my grandfather's old office surrounded by stacks of paperwork, witness statements, and legal notices, the weight of it all finally began to settle on me. This wasn't just a neighborhood feud or an overzealous H.O.A. president throwing her weight around. Victoria Ashford was the epicenter of a years-long operation built on blackmail, legal coercion, environmental sabotage, and possibly something even darker. The only unanswered question was how many people in the county were either complicit in or afraid of her influence. Just as I began organizing my findings, a car door slammed outside. I peered through the window to see Rosa Martinez rushing up my front steps, her face drained of color, hands trembling as she knocked frantically. I opened the door and ushered her inside, where she all but collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching a weathered leather purse like it was a lifeline. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice quivering, "I've been thinking about our conversation. And there's something else you need to know. Something about Harrison's death that's haunted me for 20 months. Her eyes darted nervously to the windows as if she feared unseen eyes lurking just beyond the glass. I poured her a glass of water and waited in silence, giving her time to collect herself. "The night Harrison died," she said finally, "I was walking my dog around 11 p.m. when I saw the ambulance at their house. But what's always stuck with me, what's never sat right, is what Victoria looked like. She wasn't in shock. She wasn't crying. She wasn't in pajamas or holding a robe closed or anything like that. No, she was standing in the driveway, fully dressed in business attire, calm, like she knew it was coming. Her voice cracked with unease, and the implications sent a deep, icy chill through my spine. But Rosa wasn't done. With shaking hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small manila envelope, stuffed with old newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes written in a shaky hand. "I've been collecting information," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "ever since my late—" She paused, her throat tightening. "My late cousin died under suspicious circumstances. You're not the first person Victoria has tried to push out, but you might be the first one who fights back." Corner booth, far from other patrons, Dr. Patricia Wong, a composed and sharp-eyed 43-year-old HOA physician, arrived precisely on time, her movements brisk and her gaze cautious. The moment she sat down, I could sense the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her coffee cup, and the subtle glances she kept casting toward the door. "I don't usually talk about my patients," she began, quietly, "but considering what you're suggesting, and what I remember from that night, maybe it's time someone did." Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as though the walls themselves might be listening. I nodded, letting her set the pace. "Harrison Ashford arrived by ambulance, no pulse, no breathing. They said it was a heart attack," she continued, her brow furrowed. "But something never sat right with me. His symptoms didn't line up with a typical myocardial infarction. There were strange inconsistencies, his pupils, his blood pressure before collapse, and the faint chemical scent I noticed on his clothes. I raised concerns in the chart, but the county coroner dismissed it quickly and ruled it cardiac arrest without an autopsy." I leaned in closer. "Did anyone pressure you not to push further?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not directly. But 2 days later, I received a formal warning about my documentation tone from the hospital board, something I'd never seen in my 17 years of practice. And then I heard that the coroner who signed off on Harrison's death certificate was suddenly promoted to regional director." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Whatever happened to Harrison wasn't natural, and someone made sure the official story stayed that way." Her words echoed Rose's suspicions and reinforced the chilling pattern laid out across my coffee table. Back home, environmental experts, landowners, county officials, all dying in accidents shortly after opposing Victoria's projects. And now, if Rosa was right, Harrison himself had been silenced for figuring it out. As I walked Dr. Wong to her car, I couldn't shake the feeling that my every move was being tracked, every conversation monitored. The picture was finally coming together, but with every answer, the stakes rose higher. Whatever Victoria was hiding, she'd gone to incredible lengths to bury it. And now, I was standing directly in her path. Compliance than his actual health, Caleb said, his brow furrowed as he recalled the details. "Most spouses get worried when someone skips a dose, Victoria." She got mad, really mad. It was like she needed him to take those pills, not for his well-being, but for some other reason she never explained. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of cicadas buzzing through the open truck window, the weight of what he was saying sinking in. Between Rosa's suspicions, Dr. Wong's medical insight, and now Caleb's first-hand observations, a disturbing pattern had fully emerged, one that pointed not just to manipulation or coercion, but premeditated murder. I thought back to what Dr. Wong had told me earlier, how Harrison's last words, "Victoria poison evidence in," had been cut short by the very symptoms consistent with digitalis toxicity. Elevated dioxin levels, no medical prescription, and a perfectly legal cause of death that conveniently masked the slow buildup of poison in his system. And now here was Caleb, unknowingly confirming that Victoria had maintained near total control over Harrison's medications, right down to orchestrating his daily dosage with obsessive precision. This wasn't just circumstantial anymore, it was the anatomy of a calculated, methodical execution carried out under the guise of caregiving. And with every new witness, every shred of suppressed truth, it became more clear that Victoria Ashford had left behind a trail of shattered lives, masked by carefully curated lies and protected by a network of fear and influence. As I left Caleb's workshop, a storm was building on the horizon, both literally and figuratively. I wasn't just digging up dirt on a corrupt HOA president anymore. I was pulling the thread on a tapestry of murder, manipulation, and institutional silence. And the deeper I went, the more certain I became. Victoria hadn't just killed her husband. She had perfected the art of silencing opposition, one accident at a time. Every creak in the old wooden floor felt amplified, as if my grandfather's house had suddenly become a stage set for a sinister drama unfolding in real time. Caleb's words echoed in my mind, how Victoria had been more obsessed with Harrison's supplement schedule than he was, how she insisted on specialty vitamins from a pharmacy he'd never heard of, and how her grief at the funeral had been real, but not enough to stop her. It wasn't pure evil, he'd said. It was worse than that. It was calculated betrayal. That phrase stuck with me like a thorn, because it perfectly captured the chilling truth. Victoria hadn't acted out of rage or impulse. She'd made a strategic decision, trading love for power with the cold efficiency of a boardroom executive. And that made her infinitely more dangerous, someone who could grieve you while murdering you, someone who could convince herself it was necessary. As I drove back from the meeting, trying to piece together the magnitude of what I was facing, my phone lit up with a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was mechanical, masked by a voice distorter, but the threat was razor sharp. Mr. Riverside, you're asking too many questions about things that don't concern you. Harrison Ashford had an accident because he couldn't mind his own business. Don't make the same mistake. The line clicked off before I could say a word, leaving me with a cold pit in my stomach and the chilling certainty that Victoria or someone working closely with her was not only monitoring my every move, but willing to escalate. That night, every gust of wind against the windows sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of light from the trees looked like a lens glinting in the dark. I realized that I wasn't just investigating a corrupt HOA president. I was officially walking through a minefield laid by someone capable of murder, manipulation, and absolute control. And she knew I was getting close. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind against the windows brought my mind back to that surveillance photo, its eerie precision, the silent message behind the lens. As I walked through the house one last time to double-check the locks, I spotted something chilling, a sleek black envelope that had been slipped beneath my front door while I was gone. Inside was a single photograph, Harrison Ashford's grave, marker accompanied by a handwritten note in thin, jagged letters, "Some secrets should stay buried." That night, sleep was impossible. But the next morning brought an even more aggressive move. At precisely 9 a.m., a polished patrol car rolled into my gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust followed closely by a second vehicle carrying two stone-faced deputies. Sheriff Preston Hawthorne stepped out with practiced authority. Late 40s, confident to the point of smugness, with the kind of polished smile that could flip from friendly to threatening without changing shape. His uniform was immaculate, badge gleaming, and his voice carried the weight of someone used to never being questioned. "Mr. Riverside," he said smoothly, "I'm here to discuss some very serious allegations that have been brought to my attention." He held up a manila folder thick with documents and continued, "Victoria Ashford has filed formal complaints of harassment, stalking, and threatening behavior. And let me be clear, we don't take these kinds of accusations lightly in this county." His words were cool, official, but I couldn't help noticing the wedding band on his finger glinting in the same light that had caught the edges of Victoria's jewelry days earlier. There was a familiarity there that didn't sit right. Still, I kept my expression calm and invited them inside, offering coffee with the same neutral composure I'd used during high-tension briefings in the military. As he spread the documents across my kitchen table, outlining supposed evidence and timelines, something began gnawing at the edges of my attention. Hawthorne knew things, specific details about my private conversations with Gerald Pennington and Rosa Martinez, things that had never been discussed in public or over electronic communication. Then came the final red flag, a passing comment about the situation we've been monitoring for several days now. I froze for half a second, then leaned forward, keeping my tone respectful but firm. "Sheriff," I said carefully, "it sounds like you've been aware of this situation for quite some time. Can you help me understand how you knew about my private conversations with county residents, conversations that took place before any formal complaints were filed?" His expression didn't change, but I saw the subtle tightening around his jaw. The line between law enforcement and something far murkier had just become terrifyingly thin. Looking into your situation, and what I'm seeing is deeply concerning. Victoria Ashford isn't just leveraging influence, she's orchestrating a full-scale campaign of intimidation backed by a well-oiled machine of corrupted officials and legal manipulation. Marcus's voice was low but intense, the kind of tone that meant he wasn't just giving legal advice, he was issuing a warning. He explained that he'd found irregularities in the reassessment documentation, including forged signatures and improperly filed notices. Even more alarming was a sealed court document referencing a pending civil seizure order, meaning Victoria was trying to have my property legally confiscated under false pretenses. "This isn't just harassment," Marcus continued. "It's strategic property theft, dressed up in bureaucracy. I've seen corporations do this before, but never this boldly." As we spoke, I glanced back at the files I'd uncovered, records linking campaign donations, shell corporations, and fast-tracked permits, all leading back to Victoria. Her operation wasn't just corrupt, it was precise. Every official she'd bought, every form she'd manipulated, every accident that had silenced opposition, it was all part of a carefully crafted plan to dominate the county's development landscape. The sheriff's visit, the surveillance, even the blackmail, these were just pieces of a larger puzzle, one that was starting to form a very clear and dangerous picture. As I ended the call with Marcus, he left me with one final piece of advice. Document everything. Record every interaction, save every file. And don't confront her alone. People who build empires like this don't back down without a fight. I sat back in my grandfather's worn leather chair, surrounded by evidence, threats, and questions that seemed to multiply with every answer. One thing was now painfully clear: this wasn't just a battle over land. This was a war for the truth, and the closer I got to uncovering it, the more dangerous it became. After carefully reviewing the documents you sent, I realized you need to know something critical. There's already a federal investigation underway, targeting corruption within your county government. The FBI has been quietly building a case for months, and the information you provided could be the missing link they need to make arrests. Marcus revealed that he had been discreetly contacted by federal agents investigating a web of bribery, fraud, and intimidation tied to multiple development projects across the region. One name kept surfacing in their inquiry: Victoria Ashford. She's become a person of intense interest due to her repeated connection to mysterious deaths and unexplained accidents involving individuals who stood in the way of her business empire. The investigators had been searching for someone with insider knowledge, someone brave enough to cooperate, and now it looked like I was that person. This revelation turned my world upside down. I was no longer just a lone voice battling local corruption. I was now a key piece in a high-stakes federal criminal probe. Marcus arranged for me to meet with the FBI the following week, but he cautioned me to be extremely vigilant in the meantime. Victoria, he warned, was not only powerful, but potentially lethal if she suspected that federal law enforcement was closing in. That very afternoon, Victoria convened what she dramatically labeled an emergency community safety meeting at the Lakeside Premium Estates clubhouse. On the surface, it was framed as a response to my supposed dangerous and unstable behavior. But I knew it was a calculated move to turn public opinion against me and justify having me removed from my home. Through Rosa Martinez, I discovered that Victoria had spent the entire day calling residents, spreading insidious rumors about my military service, suggesting I suffered from untreated PTSD that made me a threat to everyone around me. Her smear campaign was disturbingly strategic, mixing fragments of truth with manipulative distortions. She acknowledged my early retirement due to combat injury, but spun it into a narrative of a broken, volatile veteran unfit for civilian life. She even cited my questioning of Harrison's death as proof of delusional paranoia. What made her attacks chillingly effective was how she weaponized social media and local news, turning her lies into a viral story of fear, instability, and mistrust that painted me as the villain she wanted the world to see. By the time the so-called community safety meeting was set to begin, Victoria had already succeeded in painting herself as a vigilant neighbor deeply concerned for public safety, while casting me as a ticking time bomb, an unstable veteran whose presence threatened both lives and property values. Her story was persuasive enough that even residents who had never exchanged a word with me were now wary, convinced by the carefully orchestrated rumors and fear-mongering. As I braced myself for what I expected to be a hostile and humiliating showdown, I remembered my grandfather's old ham radio setup collecting dust in the basement. Still linked to the county's emergency services network, it gave me a dangerous but powerful tool. I could, if it came to that, use it to broadcast everything I knew about Victoria's crimes to every first responder in the region. That evening, while testing the equipment and mentally preparing for whatever Victoria was planning, my phone rang and the caller ID froze my blood. County Emergency Services. But the voice on the other end was not what I expected. Mr. Riverside. It said shakily, "If you want to know the truth about Harrison Whitmore's murder, meet me at the abandoned sawmill at dawn. Come alone, bring the radio." The voice belonged to a young woman, trembling with fear, and before I could speak a word, the call disconnected, leaving me stunned, phone in hand, trying to decide whether I was finally about to break open the case or walk straight into a deadly trap. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I was caught in a spiral of adrenaline and dread, bouncing between hope and paranoia, wondering if the mysterious caller was a whistleblower or a baited hook sent by Victoria herself. By 5:30 a.m., I had packed up my grandfather's portable ham radio and driven into the misty, pre-dawn silence toward the Cascade Lumber Sawmill, an abandoned ruin on the edge of town. The structure loomed like a rusted skeleton from another time, covered in ivy and shadow, with the air thick and silent enough that every footstep echoed like a gunshot. As I cautiously approached the main building, a young Asian woman stepped. From the darkness, her movements slow and deliberate, like someone who'd spent far too long looking over her shoulder. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed with quiet professionalism despite the setting and hour, her intelligent eyes scanning the tree line and access road with sharp, instinctive awareness, as if danger could appear at any moment. Expecting pursuit at any moment, the woman stepped fully into view, her eyes still scanning the road behind me like danger might appear at any second. "Mr. Riverside," she said in the same trembling voice I'd heard on the phone, "I'm Sophia Chen. I was Harrison Ashford's executive assistant for 3 years, and I was also his lover." Her words landed like a punch, not because of the affair itself, but because of what it meant. She hadn't just been a bystander, she'd been deeply embedded in Harrison's personal and professional life, with access to secrets few others could have known. As her voice steadied, she continued, "I've been in hiding since Harrison died. I was scheduled to testify at a deposition about Victoria's business practices, but Harrison died 2 days before. That wasn't a coincidence." She led me into the shattered office of the sawmill, now transformed into a makeshift command center with laptops, files, backup drives, and audio gear. It was clear she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. I watched Victoria poison Harrison slowly with digitalis. She mixed it into his heart supplements, Sophia said, pulling out a small glass vial of white powder. She bought it from a black market pharmacy that caters to people looking to commit undetectable murders. I saved samples of the poisoned pills because I knew I'd need proof one day. But her evidence went even deeper. Before Harrison's death, Sophia had been secretly recording conversations using an app on her phone, capturing incriminating discussions between Victoria and county officials about bribes, threats, and plans to silence opposition. She hit play on her laptop and let the audio speak for itself, voices of powerful people conspiring to erase obstacles in their path, trading influence for cash and power. Harrison wasn't just worried about the environmental impact of the resort. She explained, her eyes flickering with intensity. He found out the site is contaminated. It sits directly above poisoned groundwater from a chemical plant that was shut down in 1987. Victoria knows. Sheriff Hawthorne knows. They've been burying old EPA reports that would shut down the entire development permanently. The weight of what she'd uncovered was staggering, and suddenly, everything made sense. Harrison's death, the threats, the lies. It wasn't just corruption. It was a cover-up with lethal consequences. The recordings were explosive, irrefutable proof of a vast conspiracy that had infiltrated every corner of the county's leadership. I listened in stunned silence as Victoria's voice calmly discussed permanent solutions for property owners who refused to sell, while Sheriff Hawthorne assured her that investigations into mysterious deaths would be handled appropriately. Then came Commissioner Blake Thornton, casually confirming receipt of bribes for speeding up permit approvals. The scale of corruption was far worse than anything I had imagined. This wasn't just a crooked real estate deal. It was a criminal enterprise with lethal consequences. But then Sophia dropped the most chilling revelation of all. She's arranged for your final accident to happen tonight at the community meeting, she whispered, her face pale. Sheriff Hawthorne is going to respond to a staged emergency call about you attacking residents. The shooting will be ruled self-defense. They've already written the witness statements and filed the paperwork. The words hit me like a shockwave. This wasn't just a battle for justice anymore. It was a fight to stay alive. I wasn't dealing with political sabotage or even corporate sabotage. I was the next name on a growing list of victims. The meeting wasn't a trap to discredit me. It was the stage for my public execution. That night, the Lakeside Premium Estates clubhouse was packed wall to wall with over 80 residents, all of them primed with fear and misinformation. Victoria's smear campaign had worked to perfection. She presented what she claimed was a psychiatric evaluation diagnosing me with severe PTSD and unpredictable violent behavior, stoking fears that I could snap at any moment. The crowd wasn't just angry, they were terrified, demanding immediate action to remove what they believed was a threat to their families. Victoria stood at the head of the room like a commanding officer rallying her troops, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit that gave her the appearance of authority and moral clarity. She rolled out charts illustrating falling property values, aired tearful testimonials from frightened residents, and displayed official documents that supposedly proved my mental instability. Every element of the presentation was staged, every detail meticulously crafted to destroy me. And as I looked around the room, I realized just how completely the truth had been buried beneath layers of fear, performance, and manipulation. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began with polished confidence, her voice smooth and deliberate. Mr. Riverside has made it abundantly clear that he has no intention of respecting our community standards or addressing our very real safety concerns. Tonight we must take a stand. We will not tolerate threats to our families or our way of life. The crowd roared in approval, some rising to their feet in support, others lifting their phones to capture what they believed would be my public disgrace and removal. But just as Victoria reached the dramatic peak of her presentation, an unexpected interruption sliced through the air. The sharp, crackling voice of my grandfather's old ham radio, which I had strategically placed near the back of the room. All units, came the commanding voice of FBI Special Agent Sarah Kim. We have multiple arrests in progress at the Lakeside Premium Estates community meeting. Repeat, federal agents are moving to apprehend suspects in an active racketeering investigation. The effect was immediate, and electrifying confusion exploded into panic as the audience realized that the carefully staged event was being hijacked by a federal takedown. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and several people stumbled back in disbelief. Victoria's face drained of color as the truth hit her like a punch. Her empire was crumbling in real time. Sheriff Hawthorne, standing nearby, instinctively reached for his weapon, only to stop himself mid-motion, realizing too late that any act of aggression would only worsen his already damning situation. Amid the chaos, I spotted Sophia Chun slip in quietly through the rear entrance, wielding high-end recording gear and capturing every second. In that instant, I understood that our meeting at the sawmill, her so-called disappearance, none of it had been coincidence. It had all been part of a meticulously planned FBI sting operation, a final push to collect irrefutable evidence while keeping Sophia safely hidden from Victoria's reach. The atmosphere inside the clubhouse turned volatile, with residents shouting, pushing, and trying to understand how their neighborhood meeting had become the epicenter of a major federal investigation. Victoria stood frozen, the cracks in her polished image spreading rapidly as her control unraveled. Sheriff Hawthorne looked like a man cornered, his hand still twitching near his holster as he scanned the room for an escape he knew didn't exist. And then, in that pivotal moment of unraveling, Victoria made the desperate decision that would ultimately seal her fate once and for all. With trembling hands and panic flashing across her face, Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice escalating into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek that pierced through the rising chaos like a siren. Emergency! Emergency! There's a dangerous veteran with PTSD threatening everyone at our community meeting. He's armed. He's making violent threats. Send every available unit immediately. Her performance was flawless, genuine tears, cracked voice, and theatrical desperation that might have fooled anyone watching. But what she didn't realize was that the entire 911 dispatch system had been rerouted through the county's emergency command center as part of the FBI's operation, and the person answering her frantic call was the last person she'd ever want on the other end. The phone rang twice before a calm, authoritative voice came through. "This is Chief Robert Tank Thompson, County Emergency Services. Who's the reporting party and what's the nature of your emergency?" I froze. That voice cut through me like electricity. I knew it instantly. Tank Thompson wasn't just any official. He had been my captain in the Marines, the commanding officer I'd served under during 3 combat deployments. He was also the man whose life I'd once saved in Fallujah, carrying him out of the wreckage of an IED blast 8 years ago. Victoria, oblivious to the connection, launched into her well-rehearsed script, her voice quivering with manufactured urgency. "This is Victoria Ashford," she said breathlessly. "There's a man named Ethan Riverside. He's been harassing our community for weeks. He's mentally unstable. He has combat PTSD, and now he's threatening innocent families. You need to send armed officers immediately before someone gets hurt." But even through the phone speaker, I could hear the slight shift in Tank's tone, the cooling edge of skepticism creeping in. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but alert, "can you put Mr. Riverside on the line?" Tank asked firmly, his voice steady and unmistakably in control. "I'd like to speak with him directly before I dispatch any units." The blood drained from Victoria's face and then just as quickly surged back in a bright, humiliated flush, as she realized her emergency call was unraveling fast and in front of an entire room of people. With every eye now locked on her, she had no choice but to hand me the phone. "Tank," I said, unable to hide the wave of relief in my voice. "This is Ethan Riverside." His response was immediate and unmistakably loud. His booming laugh burst through the speaker, echoing through the silent clubhouse and stopping everyone in their tracks. "Riverside, what the hell are you doing in my county?" Tank bellowed, a grin in his voice. "And why is some lady calling 911 saying you're a threat to public safety?" That voice, warm, commanding, filled with grit and the unmistakable camaraderie of shared battle, cut through the tension like a blade. "Last I heard, you were recovering from that shoulder injury and finally taking some damn time off." With the whole room watching, I quickly explained the situation to him: Victoria's manipulation, the fabricated psychiatric reports, the threats, the FBI sting, and the mountain of evidence Sophia had gathered. The room was frozen in disbelief as Tank's presence loomed over the call like a tidal wave. Victoria had gone from flushed red to sickly white to pale green in a matter of minutes, her perfectly choreographed spectacle dissolving into ash. Sheriff Hawthorne looked like a man calculating whether he could make it to the emergency exit without being tackled, while several of Victoria's political allies began subtly backing away, trying to dissociate from the imploding disaster in front of them. "Tank," I said, my voice steadying now, "you should know this goes deep, federal deep. I've got evidence of corruption, bribery, fraud, and likely murder involving multiple county officials." Tank didn't hesitate for a second. "Copy that," he said. "All business now. Ethan, stay exactly where you are. I'm 10 minutes out with a federal tactical unit, and we're gonna lock this whole damn mess down. Do not move a muscle, we'll sort this out properly." His voice rang through the room like a gunshot, freezing every motion and silencing every whisper. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it. Victoria's empire had just been dismantled with a single phone call, and Mrs. Ashford, Tank, added, his voice firm and unmistakably final, "Since you're the one who called 911, I'm going to need you to remain available for questioning when we arrive." The 10 minutes that followed felt like suspended eternity, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Victoria made several desperate attempts to leave, citing urgent business, emergencies. Anything but the crowd, now fully aware of what was unfolding, had instinctively formed a human barrier near the exits. No one moved aside. Everyone wanted to witness how this incredible turn of events would play out. Sheriff Hawthorne, clinging to whatever scraps of authority he had left, attempted to dismiss the gathering, barking orders in a voice that once commanded respect but now rang hollow. The crowd ignored him entirely, their eyes no longer trusting. A man they now suspected was part of the rot infecting their community. When Tank Thompson finally arrived, he didn't come quietly. A convoy of black federal SUVs pulled up like thunderclouds, and out stepped a team of FBI agents equipped for high-stakes operations. And there, leading the charge, was Tank himself, an imposing 6 feet 4 inches wall of steel and authority, dressed in tactical gear that made it clear this was no last-minute intervention. His presence alone silenced the room, his reputation preceding him like a force of nature. Even Victoria, always so composed and commanding, visibly shrank in his shadow. Then came the arrests, swift and simultaneous, executed with military precision. Victoria Ashford, Sheriff Preston Hawthorne, County Commissioner Blake Thornton, 2 other county officials, all taken into custody on charges ranging from conspiracy, murder, racketeering, and fraud to environmental violations so egregious they had already drawn EPA attention. Each person was read their rights and calmly informed of the charges, the professionalism of the agents a sharp contrast to the chaos and corruption they were dismantling. But the moment that truly marked the end came as Victoria, cuffed and seething, was escorted toward a waiting federal vehicle. Still clinging to the illusion of control, she snapped at one of the agents. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to the manager." Without missing a beat, Special Agent Sarah Kim, a petite woman whose gaze could cut through stone, turned to her and replied with icy calm, "Ma'am, you just called 911 on your manager's manager." Her voice was sharp, surgical, final. "How did that work out for you?" The silence that followed was louder than any applause could have been. Victoria's response to Agent Kim's cutting remark was a venomous tirade, rapid-fire stream of threats, name-dropping powerful connections, vowing to have everyone's badges revoked and promising career-ending consequences for every agent present. But Tank Thompson ended her performance with nothing more than a look so cold, so piercing it could have melted armor plating. "Lady," he said, his voice the calm thunder of a man who had stared down enemy fire, bureaucratic red tape, and congressional hearings without flinching. "My boss fought in 3 wars and saved more lives than you've probably even met. Your hollow threats don't scare him." The room erupted into spontaneous applause, a cathartic release of tension and fear as Victoria Ashford was finally loaded into awaiting federal transport. Her reign of intimidation and manipulation had been brought to an end not by violence, but by a single misplaced call to the wrong person. And yet, the most shocking revelation was still to come. 3 days after the arrests, FBI agents conducting a search of Victoria's sprawling mansion made a horrifying discovery that would shake even the most seasoned investigators. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, they uncovered a secret room that Agent Sarah Kim would later describe as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in modern bureau history. It was a macabre trophy chamber, meticulously organized, filled with personal items belonging to 6 individuals who had all died under suspicious circumstances over the last 12 years. Each of those people had, in some way, threatened the interests of Ashford Development Corporation, and each death had been staged to appear accidental or due to natural causes. Among the chilling artifacts, Harrison Ashford's wedding ring, Dr. Robert Chun's hiking boots, Margaret Wilkins' reading glasses, James Patterson's county inspector badge, and personal effects from 2 other victims whose deaths had been brushed off and never thoroughly investigated. Victoria hadn't just been a ruthless corporate player, she had been a calculating, long-active serial killer, using murder as a tool to clear the path for her real estate empire with the same cold efficiency she applied to zoning loopholes and permit applications. Further investigation revealed that Harrison had not been her first victim, but rather the tragic finale of a killing spree that began in 2012 with her first husband, Michael Brennan. He had died of supposed food poisoning shortly after refusing to invest his inheritance in her real estate ambitions. That insurance payout became the seed money for Ashford Development Corporation, and with each new murder, Victoria eliminated a threat and expanded her influence, building an empire literally on the bones of her opposition. But even beyond the horrific personal crimes, the environmental justice aspect of the case would prove to be even more explosive than anyone had initially imagined. The contaminated groundwater site that Harrison had uncovered wasn't just a neglected environmental hazard, it was a long-buried toxic waste dump that had been leaking, carcinogens into Crystal Lake for more than 30 years. Victoria and her co-conspirators had deliberately suppressed multiple EPA reports documenting the contamination, fully aware that a proper cleanup would cost more than the entire development project was worth. Rather than face financial loss, they had chosen to build the luxury resort directly on top of the poison, a decision that would have exposed future residents and visitors to deadly cancer-causing chemicals. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Victoria Ashford was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole for 6 counts of premeditated murder, in addition to decades of consecutive sentences for racketeering, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and multiple environmental violations, ensuring she would never walk free again. Sheriff Preston Hawthorne received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, and official misconduct. County Commissioner Blake Thornton was sentenced to 12 years for racketeering and fraud, while the remaining county officials were handed sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years, depending on their involvement. Every asset linked to Ashford Development Corporation was seized. Victoria's opulent mansion, her fleet of luxury vehicles, and dozens of development properties, and the proceeds funded a full-scale environmental restoration effort. Over 18 months, the toxic site was decontaminated, and Crystal Lake's fragile ecosystem was painstakingly revived. What was once destined to become a monument to greed and deception was transformed into a federally protected nature preserve, forever shielded from commercial exploitation. For me, the conclusion of Victoria's case marked not just justice, it marked the beginning of something meaningful. I honored my grandfather's legacy and Harrison Ashford's vision by transforming Willowbrook Ranch into the Crystal Lake Wildlife Sanctuary and Environmental Education Center. The facility now welcomes visitors from all over, teaching sustainable development practices and highlighting the vital importance of protecting natural ecosystems from corporate abuse. The sanctuary became both a living memorial for Victoria's victims and a bold statement about the triumph of stewardship over selfish ambition. As for Sophia Chun, she emerged from federal protection stronger than ever, becoming a national voice for whistleblower rights. Her testimony had been the linchpin in Victoria's conviction, and her courage inspired countless others to stand up against corruption. Sophia dedicated herself to building networks of support for people facing intimidation in corporate or government environments, ensuring that no one else would have to fight alone against the kind of darkness we had both survived. Officer Maya Delroy was appointed acting sheriff and immediately took on the daunting task of reforming the county's deeply compromised law enforcement system. She introduced sweeping transparency measures, strict accountability protocols, and community oversight programs designed to prevent the kind of unchecked corruption that had once thrived under Sheriff Hawthorne's watch. Judge William Blackwood, my grandfather's old friend and fellow Korean War veteran, presided over a solemn memorial service honoring all of Victoria Ashford's victims, finally bringing closure to families who had spent years haunted by unanswered questions and silent grief. Rosa Martinez, with her deep roots in the area and her warm, unifying presence, joined the sanctuary as its official community liaison, using her understanding of local history and her empathy to help bridge the divisions that Victoria's reign had carved into the heart of the community. Through it all, I came to understand the true meaning behind my grandfather's lifelong lessons about patience and courage, not just about enduring or charging into battle, but about knowing when to wait, when to listen, and when to stand up and fight for what is right. While my military training gave me the tools to survive and confront danger, it was my grandfather's values, his unwavering moral compass, that guided my choices when everything was on the line. His old ham radio setup, once a relic of the past, became the foundation for a countrywide emergency communication network, upgraded and modernized to ensure no voice would ever again go unheard. I began hosting a weekly broadcast from the sanctuary, the community voice, focusing on environmental stewardship, local government transparency, and public engagement. What started as a small outreach project grew into a vital safeguard against corruption, a way for the community to stay informed, connected, and empowered. The transformation that followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Property values across the region surged, not because of commercial exploitation, but due to the restoration of Crystal Lake's natural beauty and the confidence that came from honest, ethical leadership. The once doomed Ashford development lands were converted into lush public parks and recreational spaces, open to all and benefiting the many instead of enriching a few. And then, 6 months after Victoria's conviction, I received an unmarked package that felt like a final chapter falling into place. Inside were architectural plans, Harrison Ashford's original blueprints for the very land he died trying to protect. But they weren't for a resort. They were for a wildlife observation center and environmental education facility, nearly identical to what I had built. Unbeknownst to anyone, Harrison had been planning the same conservation project Victoria killed him to stop. His vision had not only survived her, it had triumphed over her. Through the very land she tried to steal, his dream had finally come to life. As I stood on the hilltop where my grandfather's cabin once stood, gazing out over the restored waters of Crystal Lake as eagles soared in lazy circles overhead, I finally understood the depth of his last and most powerful lesson. True strength isn't measured by how much power you can wield over others or how much wealth you can accumulate at any cost. It's defined by your willingness to protect what truly matters, to preserve something meaningful for those who come after you, and to hold the line when it would be easier to walk away. Justice doesn't always arrive when we expect it. It takes time, patience, and more often than not, quiet courage. But when it finally lands, it crashes down with the weight of everything that's been building in silence. The biggest bullies often hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the only thing standing between them and complete destruction is a single voice that refuses to back down. And sometimes one well-timed phone call to the right person can change everything. We know how it feels to be up against something that seems too big to fight, an abusive boss who plays favorites, a corrupt official who twists the truth, or manipulative neighbors who treat basic decency like an optional suggestion. That helpless silent fury when you're gaslighted, dismissed, or outright threatened for daring to speak up, that's not weakness. It's the quiet before you rise. Ethan's story is proof that even when the odds seem impossible and you feel completely alone, your truth, your courage, and your persistence matter far more than their lies, their money, or their power. If this story reminded you that you're stronger than they ever gave you credit for, hit that like button and become part of our Harper Stories family, where we celebrate ordinary people who rise up to take down extraordinary bullies. Congratulations, you made it through that disaster without throwing a lawn chair. That, my friend, is character growth. Thanks for watching Harper Stories, where passive-aggressive letters turn into action-driven battle lines, surprise allies. appear from unexpected places, and neighborhood villains discover that clone violets and forged permits don't stand a chance against truth, unity, and a whisper that becomes a roar. Because trust us, this story was just the beginning.